colonies. All right. So, we got to the Stamp Act repeal, and everything should be fine. But what we've revealed here with the Stamp Act is a difference of opinion about how government works, or how it should work. By 1766, it is abundantly clear that the Americans have a different expectation about government than the British do. And this is essentially what it boils down to. Direct versus virtual representation. For 100 and some odd years, Americans had been electing their own representatives. Representatives that were directly answerable to the people who elected them. So therefore, if the people did not like a decision that elected representatives made, those people would be voted out of office. And so there was accountability. Americans generally tended to believe in direct representation. The British promoted this idea of virtual representation. And basically what that says is the British Parliament, because it is made up of British people, represents the interests of all British citizens, no matter where they are and no matter if they have elected members of the Parliament. The American colonies do not have elected representation in Parliament. Britain says, don't worry about that. The members of Parliament are acting in your best interests. So there is a radical difference of opinion between the Americans and the British over how best to effectively govern the colonies. Now, the Stamp Act was repealed in 1766. The lesson learned there, if America whines and cries and shouts loud enough, Britain will cave on its policies, which they did. Sons of Liberty, Committees of Correspondence, Stamp Act, Congress, non-importation agreements, all of that stuff convinced the British Parliament to repeal the Stamp Act, which it did. Yet the following year, still in need of revenue, mind you, the Parliament is going to enact a series of taxes called the Townshend duties. Duties are just another word for taxes. So when you see duties, think taxes. Now these taxes are on a variety of different things: glass, lead, paint, paper, tea, all things that the American colonists need and import. Now, the Townshend duties, which were the brainchild of the Chancellor of the Exchequer, a guy by the name of Charles Townshend, Chancellor of the Exchequer, that's like our Secretary of the Treasury. Townshend said, look, we still need revenue. We need to get revenue from the American colonies, so we're going to put forward these taxes. Now, the thing with these taxes that upset the colonists is not just that they are taxes being imposed on them by Britain, but that the money from these taxes was being used to pay colonial officials, including the governor. Now, why is that upsetting to the Americans?
Because the Americans used to pay the governors.
And so what? So the Americans used to pay the governors, now they don't have to pay the governors. Eric?
They didn't elect them.
Yeah, they didn't.
When the colonists paid the governor, be more willing to bend in Americans' favor.
That's right. The Americans had the ability to sway the governor toward what the Americans wanted. What Townshend is doing is he's trying to take the Americans out of the loop and make the colonial officials answerable to Britain, not America. And so the Americans get upset by this. They're upset by the issuance of writs of assistance, these blanket search warrants, the continual persecution of people who are violating the navigation acts, smugglers, etc. And guys, the Americans are going to react to this in very much the same way they reacted to the Stamp Act. The Sons of Liberty are going to be back at it. Committees of correspondence are going to be out there. People are going to organize. People are going to protest. They're going to write tersely worded letters to the editor. Letters like this one. Now, for God's sakes, you're not going to write all this down. But you're going to recognize that this is a document called Letters from a Pennsylvania Farmer by John Dickinson. And his idea in here: never did the British Parliament, till the period above mentioned, think of imposing duties in America for the purpose of raising revenue. Here then, my dear countrymen, rouse yourselves and behold the ruin hanging over your heads. If you once admit that Great Britain may lay duties, issue taxes, upon her exportations to us for the purpose of levying money on us only, she then will have nothing to do but to lay those duties on the articles which she prohibits us to manufacture, and the tragedy of American liberty is finished. What does that mean? If you allow Britain to levy these taxes here, what's going to happen? More taxes will follow. So the line must be drawn here. We cannot allow them to tax us at all. Because if you allow them to tax us here, what's to stop them from taxing us there, and there, and there? And the tragedy of American liberty is complete. So the Sons of Liberty go back at it. They start attacking tax collectors. They start attacking colonial officials. The committees of correspondence start back up. John Dickinson's letter makes the rounds in the newspaper, rallying people. Now, the seminal event in the Townsend Duty saga is the Boston Massacre. Troops had been sent to America to make sure that Americans were under control. After the Stamp Act crisis, the British government felt the need to send British troops to America to keep a watchful eye on what the Americans were doing. The Boston Massacre takes place one late winter night in 1770. And if you look at this etching, this is an engraving that was done. And it was reprinted over and over and over again. It was put in newspapers all throughout America. It's called the Bloody Massacre. If you were to look at this, what is the seminal message being sent by this engraving? The British are at fault. They are cruel. They fired into a crowd of innocent Americans. But do we know that to be true? Were the Americans innocent? Why did the British fire into the crowd?
The Americans were throwing rocks at them and torturing them too.
These were a group of about 10 British soldiers, average age about 17, 18 years old. Here they are in America, a land far away from home. This is their first assignment, and they're surrounded by these angry Americans who resent the fact that they're in their town in the first place, plus the fact that and there are about 300 Americans about 9 o'clock at night, and a lot of them are coming out of pubs, and they're loaded. A lot of these are dock workers. And they see these British soldiers, young teenage British soldiers, and they go over and they start harassing them. What are you going to do? Huh? Come on. I mean, you know Americans, you know Bostonians. You know, what are you going to do? Huh? Come on, what are you going to do? We gonna park the car? Boston accent. They gonna park the car? Come on, what you gonna do, tough guy? And they start harassing the British soldiers. They start throwing things. They start making. Now, the testimony from the trial of these British soldiers, when they were put on trial, revealed that the Americans were throwing not just rocks, but snowballs laced with rocks, glass, and nails. From the street. It was winter.
There's the kind of snow with glass.
They were finding, I don't know, they were making these snowballs. Hey, get me some more glass and nails. Get me some more glass and nails. But these soldiers were eventually acquitted. They were acquitted of wrongdoing. They were found not guilty. They were defending themselves. By the way, little trivia question. Does anybody know who defended these British soldiers? Wow. John Adams. Because while John Adams might not have liked the British and their policies, he also was very scared of mobs. He did not like mob rule or mob violence or anything like that. And so he saw what happened here in Boston on both sides as just generally abhorrent. But John Adams was a guy who promoted the rule of law. So with the Boston Massacre and the fallout from that and the negative publicity that the British government got, Townsend was out as Chancellor of the Exchequer. These Townsend duties were repealed. Again, what's the lesson learned here? You can cry all you want, and the law will be overturned. These taxes will be repealed. So the Townsend duties were repealed. You don't even need to write the rest of this down. Just know that as a result of the Boston Massacre, the Townsend duties were repealed. Except for the tea tax. Now, does anybody know what the purpose of the tea tax was? Yeah. Guys, I'm going to put this in terminology that's very simple and that you'll recognize. This was a corporate bailout from the British government. It was like the U.S. government bailing out the banks in 2008 to keep them afloat. The British East India Company was on the verge of bankruptcy. So the British government stepped in order to save this company. How did it do it? It gave the British East India Company a monopoly on tea sales in America to keep this company afloat. Now, the tea was cheaper than any other tea Americans could get. The tea was sold at rock bottom prices. Cheap tea. Everybody loves tea because, British citizens, 4 o'clock tea time. Time for tea, Governor. Here was the thing, though. Attached to this tea act was a teeny, weeny, itsy bitsy, tiny, infinitesimally small tax. You're still getting the cheapest tea around. And the berserk. They go crazy. We're not paying for this tea. We're not paying your tea tax. And again, the Sons of Liberty, they're back at it again. If you allow them to tax us on the tea, they're going to have nothing to do but then to tax us on everything else. And so you're going to see a lot of protesting. You're going to see a lot of violence. For instance, the Gaspé incident. A British ship off the coast of Rhode Island that was there to enforce the Navigation Acts ran aground in Rhode Island. Rather than rescue the crew, the Americans came down to the shore and burned the ship. That's what we think of your Navigation Act enforcement. Burn the ship. Violence, intimidation, destruction of property. Now, you probably have never heard of the Gaspé incident. It's very rarely ever mentioned on a test, but I thought I'd throw it in there. The thing you guys probably know the most about is the other reaction to the tea tax. The Tea Party, the Boston Tea Party. More than just a bunch of people standing around with tri-fold hats on with tea hanging from it. The Boston Tea Party, also organized by the Sons of Liberty. And in the end, what you had was essentially the destruction of, in today's money, a couple of $1 million in cargo from these tea ships. Guys, we're at 1773. The proclamation of 1763 was 10 years ago. Since the end of the French and Indian War, we have had 10 years of Americans ignoring, violating, railing against British law, protesting British law, destroying British property, inflicting damage, hurting British tax collectors. There has been violence, there has been upheaval, and this right here is the straw that breaks the camel's back. This is where the British Parliament says, no mas, enough is enough. And they decide that they are going to make an example out of the Americans from the Boston Tea Party. And they pass what are called the Coercion Acts. To coerce somebody means to force them to do something. In America, however, they are referred to as the Intolerable Acts. We can't tolerate them. They're too odious. And the Intolerable Acts are made up of a series of acts. The Boston Port Act, which closes the port of Boston. So now Boston merchants aren't able to make money. Town meetings are forbidden. No more town meetings. No more local control. Don't worry, I'm fine. I can see myself. Soldiers are going to be housed in Boston to oversee this and regulate it. Any soldier convicted of a crime, a la the Boston Massacre, are no longer going to be tried here in America. They're going to be sent back to Britain and tried. And the Massachusetts Colonial Charter is suspended. So the Boston Tea Party leads to the British making an example out of Massachusetts. Now, the Americans could have just said, fine, this is Massachusetts' problem, let Massachusetts deal with it, but instead the Americans are going to rally behind Massachusetts and come to their aid. Yes?
What is that picture?
Okay, great picture here. This is a political cartoon critical of the coercive acts. Now, what do you see happening in this political cartoon? Go ahead, Eric.
I think the guy in the wig is forcing tea down.
Yeah, he's got a woman on the ground. He's holding her down. He's forcing tea down her throat. How about this guy? He's looking up her skirt. What is this? Forcing the girl down. Forcing. It's a violation. It's a violation, a most intimate violation. These images were selected on purpose to convey just how intimate a violation this is. Who does this woman represent? America. And Lady Liberty can't stand what she sees because America is being violated by the British. And kind of to add insult to injury, along with the Coercion Acts, the British are also going to pass something called the Quebec Act. Now, you look at this and you say, well, what is the big deal here? Britain takes all the land west of the Appalachian Mountains, including the land in the Ohio River Valley, and organizes it into one big super colony called Quebec. In this colony of Quebec, there is no colonial assembly allowed, no voting, no colonial representation. It is directly ruled by Great Britain. And the French who live there, keep in mind there are like 50,000 French people who live in this colony that Britain is governing. They're allowed to keep their religion and their language, much to the chagrin of American Protestants. What the British government was doing was they were trying to make this land so inhospitable to Americans that Americans wouldn't want to move there. So this was an attempt, since the proclamation line didn't work, this was an attempt to keep Americans bottled up here along the eastern coast. So you're giving rights and freedoms to the French people, but you're taking away our liberties? How's that fair? In reaction to the Coercive Acts and the Quebec Act, closing of the port of Boston, the shutting down of the Colonial Assembly in Massachusetts, the revoking of the charter, in response to all of that punitive action, the Americans are going to do what they do best, do what they've done before. Organize, decide on a course of action. Hey, we go with what works. They form a Continental Congress. They meet in Philadelphia in the summer of 1774, and they write a tersely worded letter to Parliament. It's called the Declaration of Rights and Grievances. These are our rights. This is how we believe you violated our rights. Stop violating our rights. And they lay the blame at Parliament's doorstep. Parliament is to blame. The members of Parliament are to blame for this. The other big decision that the Continental Congress makes in 1774, what has worked in the past? What got the repeal of the Stamp Act? What got the repeal of the Townsend duties? Huh? Economic embargo. So they're going to do that again. Only this time, they're going to form a committee to oversee this embargo. It's called the Association. Now look, this is what it says. And we do further agree and resolve that we will have no trade, commerce, dealings, or intercourse whatsoever with any colony or province in North America which shall not accede to or which shall hereafter violate this association, but will hold them as untrustworthy of the rights of freemen and as inimical to the liberties of their country. Translation, for a boycott. You're either for us or you're against us. This was a means of keeping all the colonies together to prevent what Ben Franklin would call any weak noodles from violating the embargo. If you violate Maryland, if you violate this embargo, the other colonies will not trade with you. We will isolate you. We will freeze you out. We will put you in our slam book and write really nasty Facebook messages about you. Like Mean Girls, only for colonies. Now, the period between 1774 and 1775 is where things start to devolve and go downhill. Patrick Henry, speaking before the House of Burgesses in March 1775, issues his famous proclamation, "Give me liberty or give me death." Protests abound throughout the colonies. It's beginning to become clear to the British that the Americans are on the verge of being rebellious and that this must be stopped. One way to do that, take away America's guns. That is what the British soldiers were doing on their march to Lexington and Concord in April 1775. They were marching to a colonial arsenal to confiscate the guns. You want to know why the Second Amendment is in place in the Bill of Rights? It's because of this event. Whether you agree with it or disagree with it, that's why the Second Amendment is in place, because of this. The Americans are able to fight back against the British. They attack the British and send them running back to Boston. They follow the British to Boston, and the Americans lay siege to Boston to try to drive the British out. So April 1775, shots have been fired. And you have the Battle of Bunker Hill, the battle to control Boston, an attempt at peace which is rejected. The king declares the colonies to be in a state of rebellion, and by the summer of 1775, it becomes clear that the Americans have only one route, and that's independence. I'll collect the top 5 list next time. There's no new